Sandra is here with us to continue our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. Sandra, I want to talk about big picture, the Mexican women's national team, because this is a side that has struggled in recent history. They didn't qualify for the 2023 Women's World Cup. They missed out on the Olympics as well. They brought in some new pieces, including head coach Pedro Lopez, who then went on to beat the U.S. in the CONCACAF W Gold Cup. But over the last several months, how is the Mexican women's national team looking right now?
Honestly, I got to say, a little bit different from their 2023 to 2024. I mean, we saw this program kind of get this kind of wave of rejuvenation with Pedro Lopez, and they went undefeated during their entire 2023. They had an incredible Gold Cup, which I know all of us remember we were covering, where they had that really big win against the United States, and then unfortunately fell flat in the knockout rounds, suffered a 3-0 loss to Brazil, and since then they haven't had a win since March. So there's a little bit of a mixed reaction, I think, to this Mexico side in terms of what they've been doing in 2024. Those recent games in the summer, in June, a 1-1 draw against Canada, a 1-0 loss against the United States. You could see that the team identity is there. They want to be effective in their counter-pressing moments, and they want to be a Mexico side that brings the game to the opposition. Before, maybe in prior iterations of this team, where maybe they sat back in mid to low blocks, they want to get out there and make teams play against them. So I think they need to try to maybe hopefully get some more games under their belt in 2024 and not just get that experience, but really try to pick up a win.
Sandra, sticking with La Tri, their history, what are some standout moments that we should all know?
I think there's a ton, right? I think when we take a look at women's soccer as a whole, there's so much that's left where we're left wondering about the beginnings of things. We know for so much of the beginning of women's soccer that it was really outlawed in a lot of different places across the globe. And for that reason, we try to celebrate women's soccer and its current iterations so much, because it took so long for so many national teams to get where they are. And I think that includes Mexico as well. They have really early beginnings with a Mexican women's national team in 1963, but there was no official recognition until the 90s from FIFA. So you have this weird blocks of decades building up to the 90s for not just Mexico, but other Latin American countries. It was Costa Rica and Argentina who had bumps in interest in their nations, and Costa Rica went on a little bit of an exhibition tour in Mexico, and they saw that, hey, we needed to make a Mexican national team to go up against this Costa Rican side who was touring in our country. And that ultimately led to the foundations of an early team. So we have to shout out Alicia Vargas, who was referred to as La Pele during the 70s, someone who was massive figure within women's Mexican soccer. And La Pele is obviously a nod to Pele, because that is how good she was in the eyes of so many others. So there was a lot of just kind of humble beginnings for Mexican women's soccer. I think now they're starting to get eyeballs on some of these very historic moments during that time. There's a lot of folks who are recognizing that unofficial record for the largest ever attended match in Mexico. It was one of those unrecognized sort of World Cups, and so many people were in attendance to watch that. So while it's a record that exists, it's not an official one. So it's kind of an interesting mix of where Mexico has been and kind of where they're going now.
Talking about the national team, it's fascinating just hearing the history from you and seeing how far things have come, but still there's so much potential. But can you take a step back and tell us about the foundation of the Liga MX Femenil?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's another part of the history where you kind of have some mixed perceptions and opinions on it. And on one hand, it's incredible that Mexico Football Federation said we need to establish a women's professional league for our players. That is something to be celebrated. But there's all these other reasons as to why. Why did that happen? For a long time, there were players in Mexico's system that really maybe didn't have areas or clubs to play in. There's a big chunk of time during the maybe 2010 to really now kind of era of Mexican women's football where we saw players without club homes, essentially. Mexico Federation was one of these founding partners with NWSL. They allotted a player allocation system to NWSL alongside the United States and Canada. But along the way, they saw that their players weren't getting minutes, that they weren't seeing time on the pitch in NWSL. And some of the other conflicting or misinformed coaches at the time ultimately didn't rate Mexican players in the early stages of NWSL, and for those reasons likely did not see that playing time on the pitch. So it was a little bit of a mutual parting of ways where it's like, well, you don't value and rate our players. We're going to stop sending them to your league. But what happens next? We're talking about at the end of 2015. So in December of 2016, going into that season, they said no more Mexican players are going to be allocated to NWSL. What do we do to make sure that there is a place to develop Mexican players for this program? And that's kind of how Liga MX Femenil was born. They took a little while to kind of have this onboarding to Liga MX Femenil. They really didn't have the apertura until July 2017. But now here we are in 2024 watching some of these teams compete in a CONCACAF W Championship Cup to possibly represent the region at a future FIFA Women's Club World Cup.
Liga MX Femenil has undoubtedly gone I feel unappreciated more broadly. It definitely needs more coverage, more loud noise around it. And I think there have been moments where big player signings have kind of shattered a lot of predispositions or notions about the league itself. Chiefly, like Mia Fischel going to Liga MX Femenil was massive. How much do you think that changed sort of the perception of Liga MX, its competition with NWSL more broadly, Sandra?
It absolutely does. I mean, and this is part of Liga MX Femenil's history. They had to build kind of slowly. And I think in a world where we live in instant gratification, we want results right away. It's been a bit of a slow burn for them. They had to start out a certain way. They said, this is only going to be a Mexican league for Mexican players. We're going to have young Mexican players in this league. And then season 2, they integrated a couple of more older Mexican players. And then they didn't have foreign-born players until as recently as a couple of seasons ago. So now that we see Mia Fischels of the world selecting Liga MX Femenil or Jenny Hermoso, right, a World Cup player, everybody was talking about how Liga F is going to blow everyone away in competition. But Jenny Hermoso was playing her soccer in Liga MX Femenil when Spain won their World Cup. So there's a lot of steps that they've taken to make progress. And they're still technically a very young league in this globe of women's soccer. So there's still much further to go as well.
The future domestically for Mexico is very, very bright. But when we think internationally for Mexico, Sandra, the U20 Women's World Cup, Mexico fell to the U.S. in the round of 16, 3-2 ultimately. But looking ahead for this youth squad, any players stand out to you that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably from that U20 squad, honestly. I think Montse Saldivar, Alice Soto, Renata Cota are players to really keep an eye on coming out of that U20 performance. Montse Saldivar kind of functions as a left back with Club America, but can play left winger as well. Alice Soto has absolutely a string pulling attacking mid in the middle third there, and Renata Cota as a goalkeeper for Club Leon started every single game for that team during the U20s. And I want to give a special shout out to Haley Gordon as well. She's dual national that we see a lot of those types of players on the team, and she's representing University of Georgia.
Sandra, thanks. These are awesome. I like when we get young players that we can keep an eye out for and keep watching, especially as they continue to come up the ranks. Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks. Have a great show, y'all.